Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
We were at this overpriced fusion place with white tablecloths that looked like they'd never seen spaghetti sauce. The kind of spot where the menu didn't list prices and every waiter acted like they had a film degree. Madison sat at the head of the table, glowing in that rehearsed kind of way she had, her teeth practically catching the candlelight like she was posing for an ad. Mom had curled her hair into those soft waves that made her look like some catalog model, and Dad kept patting her hand like she'd survived a war instead of just gotten a degree in communications from a mid-tier state school after 6 years and 3 major changes. The applause started before she even opened the box, which was ridiculous considering no one knew what was inside. Madison gasped like she was auditioning for Broadway, pulling out a silver Rolex, gleaming under the overhead lights. Genuine. I didn't even have to squint to know it was real. Dad wouldn't let his baby girl graduate without something she could flash on Instagram with one of those overused captions like "hard work pays off." Everyone at the table clapped. Aunts, cousins. That weird guy Mom always invites who once tried to sell me insurance at a funeral. All of them smiling, nodding, as if this wasn't just another episode in a very long series we'd all been cast in against our will. Everyone except me. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I didn't even pretend to sip my wine. I just sat there, fingers laced over my lap like I was bracing for turbulence, which, in a way, I was. You could feel the tension tighten like a noose. Mom glanced at me, then looked away fast, as if eye contact might summon a ghost. Madison, of course, pretended not to notice. She always pretended not to notice things that made her uncomfortable: pain, poverty, me. Dad was the one who broke the silence. He always is. He said, "Honey, aren't you going to clap for your sister? She's worked so hard for this." And there it was. The moment. I'd been waiting for that question, not hoping, just waiting, like you wait for a light to turn red when you already know you're going to run it anyway. I looked at him for maybe 3 seconds longer than was polite, long enough for him to realize something was off, but not long enough for anyone else to say a word. Then, without blinking, without raising my voice, without so much as a change in breath, I reached into my purse, pulled out a folded piece of cream paper, thick, textured, expensive, and slid it across the table like it was a check at the end of a very bad date. Nobody said anything. You could hear the buzz of the wine fridge behind the bar and the clink of forks from the table behind us. Dad looked at the letter, then at me, then at Mom. She picked it up, unfolded it delicately, the way she used to peel back layers of wrapping paper on Christmas morning when she didn't want to damage the ribbon. Her eyes scanned it, and then something in her face collapsed. Not dramatically. Not like in the movies. Just, gently, like a tire losing air. She passed it to Dad, whose jaw tensed before he even read past the first line. Madison, still holding the Rolex, tilted her head and said, "What's that?" No one answered her. I didn't even look her way. And that's when the flashbacks started bleeding in. I was 12 when I first realized things were off, when I got straight A's and my teacher wrote home about how I was helping tutor the other kids in math. They didn't even mention it at dinner. But when Madison brought home a C- in science, Mom spent 2 weeks baking cookies for the teacher and getting her extra credit. At 15, I was working weekends at the grocery store so I could buy my own clothes while Madison got a shopping trip every time she cried in the car. I got into my top college, out of state, full scholarship, and they said, "That's great. But who's going to look out for Maddie if you're not here?" They co-signed her loans, paid her rent, covered her summer abroad in Greece, because she needs perspective. When I broke my arm at 25 and couldn't work for 6 weeks, I asked if they could help with the rent that month. Mom said, "Sweetie, we've done so much for you already. Don't be so dependent." But they never remembered the things they said. Only the way I always made them feel guilty. So I stopped talking. And I started writing. The letter had been brewing for years. Not that I told them. I just waited. I waited for the applause. For the Rolex. for the question that would finally pull the pin. And now here we were at the fancy table, everyone frozen like statues in some modern art exhibit called Denial and Other Delusions. The letter sat between them like a landmine they'd already stepped on. The damage was happening, it just hadn't reached the surface yet. I picked up my wine glass, finally, and took a sip. It tasted expensive and sour. Madison stared at me like I'd just grown horns. Dad's lips were moving but no words were coming out. Then he finally asked, softly, "What is this really?" And I smiled. Exactly what it looks like. The thing no one tells you about being the easy child is that the easier you make it for them, the less they think about you at all. They say things like, "We never have to worry about you," and they don't understand how that feels less like a compliment and more like an admission that you're invisible. From the time I could remember, Madison was the star, and I was the stage she stood on. My job was to be steady, quiet, responsible, and always ready to applaud. I think I started clapping for her when she was still in diapers and just never stopped, at least not until tonight. When we were kids, she was the one who had tantrums in the cereal aisle, and I was the one apologizing to strangers while Mom acted like it was a personal attack on her day. I did my homework without being asked. I learned how to cook eggs when I was 8. I kept my room clean. But none of that made me seen, not really. Because the drama Madison brought into a room was so loud and bright, it sucked up all the oxygen before I even had a chance to speak. When Madison was 13, she decided she wanted to join cheerleading. Not because she liked the sport, she barely knew the difference between a toe touch and a back tuck, but because the girls who cheered got attention. She didn't make the team on the first try, and that night she cried so hard in the kitchen that Mom canceled my birthday dinner because Madison was too upset to be left alone. I sat in my room eating a cold cupcake from the grocery store while they watched Bring It On downstairs and told her she was just as good as those girls, maybe even better. 2 years later, Madison took Dad's car without asking and drove it into a mailbox while texting her boyfriend. Instead of punishment, she got her own car, an old but decent Honda, and I got a lecture about how I should have been watching out for her. I was 16. I wasn't even in the car. Didn't matter. By the time college applications rolled around, I had already figured out I'd be doing it alone. I didn't even ask for help because I didn't want to hear "money's tight" again while Madison was being fitted for another winter formal dress. I applied to 9 schools. Got into 7. Took a full-ride scholarship to one that was 3 states away because I needed air. I needed space. I needed something that didn't smell like vanilla candles and hypocrisy. When I told them about the scholarship, Mom said, "Well, that's great, honey, but you're not going to throw it in Madison's face, are you? She's been having a tough year." I didn't ask what part was tough: the new boyfriend, the new phone, or the trip to Disney she went on with her friend's family. I didn't get a gift. I didn't get a dinner. I didn't even get a card. "We don't want to play favorites," they said. Except they did. Every single day. And I wasn't even in the game. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they made her mediocrity sacred and my competence invisible. When I graduated with honors, they didn't come. "Flights are expensive," Dad said, while Madison was tagging them in poolside photos from Cancun. They helped her with every move-in, every roommate spat, every failed class. Meanwhile, I was patching together rent with tutoring gigs and skipping meals to afford textbooks. I once sold plasma to make sure I could get my car registration renewed. That same week, they sent Madison $300 just because she seemed a little down. And yes, I remember every dollar. I remember every time they said, "We're just trying to keep things fair." I remember when Madison got a MacBook and I got a lecture about budgeting smarter. I remember when she studied abroad in Italy for a semester and called home crying because she missed American food, and they overnight her a care package full of snacks, and I thought about that box every time I ate ramen for the 4th night in a row. I spent over 6 years in undergrad and med school. That's like 11 years total. And I hope someone in the comments screams about that math. Go ahead. I'm counting on it. The point is, my life was built on their silence. Every win I had was a solo act. Every time I succeeded, I was told not to gloat. Every time she failed, I was told to be more supportive. But my resentment didn't come in like a storm. It came in like fog. Quiet, creeping, always there when I exhaled. It sat with me during holidays when Madison got a new purse, and I got a we love you the same. It lingered on my tongue every time I swallowed an apology I didn't owe anyone. It was calm, measured, patient, until it wasn't. That letter I handed them tonight? It wasn't spite. It wasn't even anger. It was accounting. A ledger of years. A receipt for the parts of myself I gave up trying to earn their love. When Mom opened it at the table, I saw her fingers tremble, saw her chest rise and fall like she was about to dive into deep water. She looked up at me like she didn't recognize me. And maybe she didn't. Maybe the girl who never asked for anything had finally become someone unrecognizable. Her voice cracked when she said, What is this?" I looked back at her, steady and calm. "That," I said, "is what it cost me to be your easy one." There are silences that stretch over minutes, and then there are silences that settle over years, curling their way into the bones of a family like rot beneath polished floorboards. The kind that doesn't make a sound until it's too late, and the whole damn thing is ready to cave in. When I handed them that letter, I wasn't trying to make a scene or start a war. I was just handing back the silence they'd given me, in equal measure, but finally on my terms. My father's face went gray almost instantly. The color drained out like someone had pulled a plug at the base of his neck. He didn't move to open the letter right away, but I saw his eyes flicker, the same way they used to when he'd catch Madison lying about sneaking out but never say a word. He'd just look away and let it pass, like he was afraid of what would come out if he pressed too hard. My mother's lips parted like she wanted to say something, maybe call me dramatic, maybe ask me not to ruin this special night, but she didn't. Instead, she opened the paper with those trembling fingers, the ones she used to press to her lips when she watched Madison dance at recitals, like she was witnessing a miracle. She didn't cry right away, not in the way people expect. There were no sobs, no shaking shoulders, no pleas for understanding. It was just her eyes, wide and wet, the way a person looks when the foundation they've been standing on their entire life suddenly gives way beneath their feet. She handed it to my father like it was radioactive, and I watched him read it, watched his eyes move faster and faster like he thought he could escape the words if he just read them quickly enough. No one said a damn word. It was cold in that room, suddenly, like the AC had kicked in too hard, or maybe the chill came from something deeper, something that had been sitting there for years unnoticed until it finally surfaced. The table had gone from celebration to courtroom in the space of 60 seconds, and all I did was sip my wine and let them feel the weight of me for once. They always thought my silence was consent. They mistook it for grace, for understanding, for a calm temperament. But they never once stopped to wonder if it was something else, something sharper, something colder. They thought I was too mature to hold grudges, too grounded to keep score. But I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping receipts. And the thing about a quiet child is we don't explode. We write. We remember. When I was 15, I got a scholarship from a community organization that handed out one award a year to a student in the county who showed exceptional academic promise despite economic hardship. It was a big deal. The ceremony was in a high school gym, nothing fancy, but they gave me a plaque and a check, and even said my name into a microphone. I came home with my cheeks still red from pride, and when I handed my mom the envelope with the letter and the check, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "That's great, sweetie, but maybe don't bring it up too much around Madison. She's already having a hard time keeping her grades up." I nodded. I always nodded. When I was 20, I was holding down 2 jobs while taking a full course load and dealing with a roommate who had a revolving door of boyfriends and a serious mold problem in the bathroom. Madison, meanwhile, was failing out of her freshman year, again. That made 3 attempts at college, 3 different schools, and somehow she was still getting encouragement and support while I was told not to make a fuss, not to act superior, and definitely not to complain. At one point, Mom sent me an email asking if I could drop by and help Madison organize her study materials because I'd always been so good at staying focused. I didn't even respond. That was the year I realized I wasn't the older sister. I was the unpaid third parent. The fixer. The example. The buffer between Madison's breakdowns and their sense of failing as parents. I was the good soldier in a family that didn't even know there was a war. They always thought I was quiet because I didn't notice. Like their words didn't land. Like their favoritism was too subtle to register. They told themselves that I was emotionally self-sufficient, which was just a fancy way of saying they didn't want to deal with me unless I was helping someone else. They used my silence as proof that I was fine. And to be fair, I let them. I wore that mask so well they forgot it was one. But the truth is I was writing this letter since I was 12. Not literally, not at first. But every time I was overlooked, every time I was told to dim my light so Madison could shine, I filed it away. Every time they asked me to be understanding when no one had ever once asked her to do the same for me, I made a mental note. And eventually, those notes became lines, and the lines became pages. Not bitter. Not angry. Just factual. Detailed. Documented. A case file, really. The kind you build when you know deep down no one's ever going to advocate for you but yourself. So now here we were. 2 decades later. One note on thick ivory paper. And 20 years of silence finally answered. The thing about keeping records isn't that you expect to use them one day, it's that you know, eventually, someone's going to tell you your memory is wrong, that what happened didn't really happen the way you said it did. And you'll need more than just your version of events to make them stop talking. I didn't write the letter because I wanted revenge or closure or even forgiveness. I wrote it because someone needed to put it all in one place, and it damn sure wasn't going to be them. It started cold. The first page was short and cruel in its clarity, just 3 bullet points, each dated, each supported by a document tucked into the back envelope. January 10th, 2014, Madison calls me crying, says she's being evicted. She spent her rent money on a ski trip with friends and now her landlord's threatening legal action. She begs me to cover it and says Mom and Dad will pay me back next week. I send $800. Text exchange attached. Venmo screenshot included. No reimbursement ever received. May 23, 2016. Car accident. Fractured wrist. Torn meniscus. Medical bill totals just under $3,000 after insurance. I asked Dad if he can help cover it because I'm between jobs and paying rent late. He says, and I quote, "You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. That's part of growing up." I attached the hospital invoice, the debt collection letter, and a receipt showing I paid it off over 7 months. August 2nd, 2018. Accepted to Johns Hopkins graduate program with a full academic scholarship. I email Mom the news. No reply. I call the next day. She says, "That's great, honey. But did you know Madison's therapist says she might be dealing with rejection trauma from not finishing school?" There's a copy of the offer letter and a printout of the email thread where my update was left unanswered for 3 days before I got a single-line response. "Proud of you." No punctuation. These weren't sob stories. They weren't pleas. They were facts, stripped of emotion, stacked in order like evidence in a courtroom. There was a Venmo history going back 6 years, small payments, 20 here, 50 there, covering Madison's Uber rides, missed bills, forgotten birthday gifts for relatives. I kept it all, because every time I mentioned how much I did for her, they waved it off like I was being petty, like being generous erased the right to ever bring it up. I added the invoice from my therapist, too. For years of weekly sessions, out of pocket. Because I didn't want to become the bitter woman who sat at family dinners swallowing the urge to scream. I didn't want to yell. I wanted to understand. I wanted to believe there was something wrong with me, something that could be fixed if I just tried hard enough to see things their way. But you sit in a chair long enough, unpacking the same stories again and again, and eventually the pattern starts to form whether you want it to or not. The letter didn't explain how it felt when I watched them applaud Madison for things I did years earlier without acknowledgement. It didn't talk about the time I got a teaching award and didn't bother to tell them because I knew it would only make Madison feel compared. It didn't mention the Thanksgiving dinner where I brought a boyfriend home and Dad spent the entire evening asking him questions about Madison instead. I didn't need to tell them how it felt. That was the point. The letter wasn't about feelings. It was about facts. You don't argue with timestamps. You don't cry your way out of a PDF file. And then, on the last page, after all the receipts and screenshots and typed bullet points, I wrote one sentence in my own handwriting. You never noticed my absence, but you'll feel it now. When my father reached that part, he blinked once, slowly, like someone trying to clear dust from their vision. My mother's hands were flat against the table now, as if bracing for impact that had already come. No one spoke for what felt like an entire minute. I picked up my napkin, folded it gently, and set it beside my glass. The wine was still half full, and I thought for a moment about downing it just to be dramatic, but I didn't need to. The drama was already baked into the silence. I stood up slowly, let my chair slide back with that soft scraping sound that always makes people look up. Across from me, Madison was fidgeting with her Rolex like the band was too tight, her face twisted into that tight, offended confusion she wore any time she wasn't the center of some flattering narrative. She still hadn't said anything, which, for her, was the equivalent of a full-blown nervous breakdown. I slung my purse over my shoulder. My mother looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this really goodbye? And that's when I finally smiled, not wide, not cruel, just tired. The kind of smile you give when the storm has already passed and you're standing in the wreckage wondering why you ever thought the roof wouldn't cave in. That's not up to me, I said. It never was. When I stepped out of that restaurant, the air hit me in a way that almost felt like a second skin peeling off, cool and heavy and sharp with the kind of early summer humidity that sits on your shoulders like a dare. I didn't look back, not once, not even when the hostess turned her head slightly as if wondering whether I was storming out or just done pretending. I didn't have to slam a door or make a speech or break a glass for them to know I was finished. The silence I left behind did the job perfectly. The drink I hadn't touched, the letter still trembling in my mother's hand, the look on Madison's face like she'd been hit with a reality she couldn't Instagram filter away. That was more than enough. There were other guests there, cousins and neighbors, people who had clapped without even knowing what the hell they were clapping for, people who'd said, "Congrats, Maddie," like they'd rehearsed it in the car on the way over, people who would go home and say they'd witnessed some family thing unfold but wouldn't know how to describe it. And good. Let it stay messy. Let it stay confusing. That's exactly what being in that family felt like for me. Like living in a house full of smiles that always ended in warning looks. Like every gift came with guilt, and every silence came with conditions. I didn't cry when I got home. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not when I hung up my blazer and tossed the heels into the back of the closet like they'd betrayed me. I didn't cry because there was nothing left to grieve. You don't mourn a performance once you've walked off the stage. You just let the applause fade into silence and keep walking. A week passed. 7 full days. No calls. No messages. No carefully worded emails from Mom asking if we could talk this through. Not even a quote tweet from Madison throwing shade in the passive-aggressive way she loved so much. They didn't reach out, but I wasn't waiting anymore. That was the freedom, really, the absence of expectation. The absence of hope. Not because I was broken or bitter or cold, but because I finally understood that their love was conditional on my obedience, and I was done obeying. Then, on the 8th day, Madison messaged me. It was short and sharp and perfectly on brand. "You ruined everything." No context. No punctuation. Just those 3 words like a bullet wrapped in a text bubble. I stared at it for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to feel the familiar weight of responsibility rise in my chest, like maybe I owed her an explanation, or a softened version of the truth, or a way back into the narrative where I was the steady one and she was the star. But then I looked over at my dog. His name is Justice, by the way, because I've got a sense of humor that no one in my family ever appreciated, and I realized I didn't owe her anything. Not a reply, not a reason, not even a single more second of my attention. Because she was wrong. I hadn't ruined anything. I just stopped pretending. And sometimes that's all it takes to burn the whole thing down. I moved 3 months ago. New apartment. New job. New grocery store where nobody asks about my parents or remembers the last name that used to be glued to Madison's shadow. I see a new therapist now, someone who doesn't start every sentence with, well, maybe they meant well, and who doesn't blink when I say things like, I think they liked me better when I stayed small. I've started painting again, badly, messily, like a kid with finger paints and nothing to prove. And I walk Justice every morning before sunrise, when the streets are empty and the world hasn't yet decided who we have to be. I don't think about them as much as I thought I would. Sometimes, sure, I'll see a pair of matching wine glasses in a shop window and think about how they never let me pick the good ones, or I'll hear a voice in a crowd that sounds like my mother's and instinctively suck in my breath. But mostly, it's just quiet. And I've grown to love the quiet. The real kind. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of not needing anything from people who refuse to give it. I heard through a cousin, one of the few who still follows me, quietly, without ever liking a post, that they sold the Rolex. Said it was an emergency, something about a legal thing with Madison's lease or a credit card that had gone unpaid. I didn't ask. I didn't care. Maybe it went towards something urgent, something they felt mattered. Good. Let it carry that weight. Let it remind them that applause fades fast when you've been clapping for a mask. The irony isn't lost on me that they gave her a watch to mark time while pretending I'd never run out of mine. That they measured her success in metal and mine in silence. That they thought she'd wear that thing like a crown while I walked away wearing nothing but the truth. Some things you bury. Others? You burn. And some, you fold into 4 corners and leave on a linen-covered table between a steak knife and a glass of wine.